The dust from the stagecoach had barely settled on her worn traveling dress when Clara Hensley pushed through the swinging doors of the Golden Spur Saloon in Abilene, Kansas, her heart hammering against her ribs as she surveyed the room full of weathered faces and suspicious eyes. The year was 1878, and she had traveled 3 weeks from Philadelphia with nothing but a carpetbag and the clothes on her back after her father's creditors had seized everything following his death. The saloon fell quiet as every man turned to stare at the young woman standing in the doorway, her dark hair escaping from beneath a battered hat, her green eyes defiant despite the exhaustion that lined her face. The bartender, a heavy man with a handlebar mustache, wiped down the counter with a dirty rag and looked her up and down with barely concealed contempt. Clara lifted her chin and walked straight toward him, her boots clicking against the wooden floor with more confidence than she felt. She could feel the weight of every gaze following her movement, could hear the whispers starting to ripple through the crowd like wind through prairie grass. "I am looking for work," she said clearly, her voice carrying across the suddenly silent room. "I can cook, clean, keep books, and I am not afraid of hard labor." The bartender snorted and several men laughed outright. "This ain't no place for a lady looking for respectable work," he said, his meaning clear in the leer that accompanied his words. "Unless you are looking for a different kind of employment, and even then, you would need to talk to Madame Rose upstairs." Heat flooded Clara's cheeks, but she held her ground. "I am looking for honest work. I can read and write, I know my numbers, and I am willing to do whatever needs doing for fair wages and a place to sleep." "Girl, you best turn around and get back on whatever brought you here," the bartender said, turning away dismissively. "We got no use for Eastern ladies who do not know their place." Clara felt her last hope crumbling like dried earth. She had spent her final coins on the stagecoach fare to Abilene, betting everything on the stories she had heard of the booming cattle town where workers were always needed. But she had not counted on the fact that respectable work for a woman alone was nearly impossible to find, especially when she had no references and no family to vouch for her character. She was about to turn away, defeated, when a chair scraped loudly against the floor. A tall figure rose from a corner table, and the entire saloon seemed to hold its breath. Clara found herself looking at a man who stood well over 6 feet, with shoulders that stretched the fabric of his worn cotton shirt and hands that looked like they could break a man in half. But it was his face that caught her attention, sharp-featured and sun-bronzed, with eyes the color of a summer sky that held something she had not expected to see: respect. "Come to my ranch," he said, his voice deep and steady. "I need a housekeeper. The pay is fair and you will have your own room in the main house. Work is hard but honest, and I give my word you will be treated with respect." The bartender's eyes widened. "Now, Garrett, you cannot be serious. You do not know nothing about this girl." The man called Garrett never took his eyes off Clara. "She is willing to work. That is all I need to know." He took a step forward, his boots heavy on the floorboards. "My last housekeeper married my foreman and moved to her own place 3 months back. The ranch house is in sorry shape, and my cooking would kill a man with an iron stomach. If you can do what you say you can do, the job is yours. $30 a month, room and board, and Sundays off for church if you are inclined." Clara's mind raced. $30 a month was more than generous, almost suspiciously so. But as she looked into those steady blue eyes, she saw no deception there, only a straightforward honesty that seemed as much a part of him as his weathered hands and sun-lined face. She had no other options, no other offers, and nowhere else to go. "I accept," she said, squaring her shoulders. "When do I start?" "Now, if you are able," Garrett replied. He placed a few coins on the bar to settle his tab, then gestured toward the door. "My wagon is outside." "It is a 2-hour ride to the Double G Ranch." Clara nodded and turned to follow him, aware of the muttering that erupted behind them as they left. As they stepped out into the bright Kansas sunshine, she got her first good look at her new employer. He was perhaps 28 or 30 years old, with dark hair that curled slightly at his collar and a face that was handsome in a rough-hewn way. He moved with the easy confidence of a man comfortable in his own skin, and there was something about the set of his shoulders that spoke of responsibility carried without complaint. His wagon was a sturdy ranch vehicle, pulled by 2 solid horses. Garrett took her carpet bag and placed it gently in the back before offering his hand to help her up onto the seat. His grip was firm but careful, and Clara found herself noticing the calluses on his palm, the evidence of hard work that matched his weathered appearance. As they rolled out of town, Garrett kept his eyes on the road ahead. "I should tell you about the setup," he said after a few minutes of silence. "I run about 2,000 head of cattle on 15,000 acres. I have got 12 men working for me, including my foreman, Jack Morgan. They bunk in the main building, separate from the house. You will be in the main house, which is where I stay as well, but you will have your own room with a lock on the door. I will not have any man on my property disrespecting you, and that includes myself." Clara studied his profile, surprised by his directness. "Why did you offer me the job? You do not know anything about me." Garrett was quiet for a moment, guiding the horses around a deep rut in the road. "I know you walked into a rough saloon alone, looking for honest work. I know you held your head up when those men laughed at you, and I know you got the courage to leave everything behind and come west looking for a new start." He glanced at her briefly. "That tells me more than any reference letter could." "I came from Philadelphia," Clara heard herself saying. "My father died 6 months ago. He had debts I did not know about. The creditors took everything, even my mother's wedding ring. I had an aunt here in Kansas, or so I thought, but when I arrived in Wichita, I learned she had passed away 2 years ago. I had just enough money left to get to Abilene." "I am sorry for your loss," Garrett said quietly. "Both of them." The simple sincerity in his voice touched something deep inside Clara, and she had to blink back sudden tears. She had not cried once since her father's death, had held herself together through the auction of their possessions, through the long journey west, through every disappointment and setback. But this stranger's kindness threatened to crack the careful control she had maintained for months. "Thank you," she managed. "I will work hard for you, Mr. Garrett. You will not regret giving me this chance." "Just Garrett," he corrected. "Garrett Sullivan. Mr. Sullivan was my father, and he has been dead these past 10 years. "Clara Hensley," she replied, then added, "Just Clara." The corner of his mouth lifted in what might have been a smile. "All right then, Clara. Welcome to the Double G." The ranch, when they finally reached it, took Clara's breath away. The main house was a sprawling structure of wood and stone, larger than she had expected, with a wide porch that wrapped around 3 sides. Beyond it stood the bunkhouse, several barns, corrals filled with horses, and in the distance, she could see cattle dotting the rolling prairie like dark clouds against the golden grass. It was vast and wild and beautiful in a way that the neat streets of Philadelphia had never been. Garrett helped her down from the wagon and carried her bag up to the porch. Inside, Clara could see immediately what he had meant about the house being in sorry shape. Dust covered every surface, dishes were piled in the kitchen, and the floors looked like they had not seen a broom in months. But the structure was sound, the furniture was good quality, and she could see the bones of what had once been a well-kept home. "Your room is upstairs, second door on the right," Garrett said, setting her bag down. "Take some time to settle in. There is a pump out back for washing. Supper is usually around 7, but do not worry about cooking tonight. I will have one of the men bring something from town." Clara shook her head. "If I am your housekeeper, then I should start keeping house. If you will show me the kitchen and what provisions you have, I will have supper ready by 7. Garrett looked at her for a long moment, and Clara thought she saw something like admiration flicker in his eyes. "The kitchen is through there," he said, gesturing to a doorway. "Pantry is fully stocked. We get supplies from town every 2 weeks. If you need anything special, let me know." He showed her around the house, pointing out the wood stove, the pantry, the linen closet, and the washroom. Then he excused himself to check on the ranch operations, leaving Clara alone in her new home. She climbed the stairs to her room and found it clean if dusty, with a real bed, a dresser, and a window that looked out over the prairie. It was more than she had dared hope for. After unpacking her few belongings, Clara set to work. She found an apron hanging in the kitchen, tied it around her waist, and began by washing the mountain of dishes in the sink. Then she swept the kitchen floor, wiped down the table and counters, and investigated the pantry. There were potatoes, onions, carrots, dried beans, salt pork, flour, sugar, and various other staples. She found a smokehouse out back with beef hanging and a cold cellar with butter and milk. By the time the sun started to sink toward the horizon, Clara had a pot of beef stew simmering on the stove, fresh biscuits baking in the oven, and the kitchen spotlessly clean. She had even found time to sweep the main living area and dust the furniture. Her back ached and her hands were red from scrubbing, but she felt a satisfaction she had not experienced in months. Garrett returned just before 7, and she heard him stop in the doorway. "Good Lord," he said quietly. Clara turned from the stove, wiping her hands on her apron. "Supper is ready." "Should I set one place or two?" "Two," Garrett said, still looking around the transformed kitchen with something like amazement. "Unless you are too tired to eat with your employer." "I am not too tired," Clara assured him, though in truth she was exhausted. She set 2 places at the now-clean table and ladled stew into bowls, then brought over the basket of hot biscuits and fresh butter she had churned from cream she had found in the cold cellar. They ate in companionable silence for a few minutes. Clara watched Garrett from beneath her lashes, noting the way he ate with steady purpose, like a man who rarely took time to enjoy a meal. When he reached for his 3rd biscuit, she allowed herself a small smile. "This is the best meal I have had in 3 months," Garrett said finally. "You are not exaggerating your skills. My mother believed that every woman should know how to run a household properly," Clara replied. "She taught me everything before she died when I was 16. She taught you well." Garrett finished his stew and sat back, studying her across the table. "I should tell you about the men who work here. They are good men mostly, but they are rough. Some of them might test you at first, see if you will run. Do not let them buffalo you. If any man gives you trouble, you come straight to me. Understood?" Clara nodded. "I understand. But I grew up with servants and tradesmen coming through our house constantly. I know how to manage difficult men." Garrett's eyebrow rose. "Your father must have been well off before he fell on hard times." "He was a merchant," Clara said carefully. "He made poor investments in the panic of '73. We managed to keep up appearances for a while, but after he died, everything fell apart." She met Garrett's eyes directly. "I am not ashamed of where I came from, but I am also not too proud to work for my keep. This life might be different from what I knew, but I will learn what I need to learn." "I have got no doubt about that," Garrett said softly. Over the following days, Clara settled into a routine at the Double G Ranch. She rose before dawn to start breakfast for Garrett and the ranch hands, who took their morning meal in the kitchen before heading out to their work. Then she spent her days cleaning, cooking, mending, and gradually transforming the neglected house into a proper home. She scrubbed floors until they gleamed, beat the dust from curtains, polished every surface until it shone, and organized the chaos that had accumulated during the months without a housekeeper. The ranch hands were wary of her at first, these rough men who spent their days wrestling cattle and breaking horses. But Clara treated them with the same calm respect she showed everyone, never simpering or acting helpless, but never pretending to be something she was not. She learned their names, their preferences for coffee, the way each man liked his steak cooked. When young Billy Preston caught his hand in a gate and came to the house bleeding, she cleaned and bandaged the wound without flinching, earning his eternal gratitude and the respect of the other men. But it was Garrett who occupied more and more of her thoughts as the weeks passed. She learned his habits, the way he took his coffee black and strong, how he liked his eggs fried hard, the fact that he always checked the horses before turning in for the night. She noticed the way he treated his men with firm fairness, never asking them to do anything he would not do himself. She saw how he gentled the wildest horses with patience rather than force, and how he carried an injured calf back to the barn on his own shoulders rather than leaving it for the predators. He was different from any man she had known in Philadelphia, where gentlemen wore fine clothes and spoke in carefully measured words about business and society. Garrett spoke plainly, worked with his hands, and measured a man by his character rather than his connections. And despite the roughness of his life, there was a gentleness in him that showed itself in unexpected moments, in the way he moved carefully around her in the narrow kitchen, in his soft-spoken thanks for every meal, in the respect he showed her without exception. One evening in late summer, about 6 weeks after Clara had arrived at the ranch, a sudden thunderstorm swept across the prairie. The ranch hands had all made it back to the bunkhouse before the rain started, but Garrett was still out checking the far pasture. Clara stood on the porch, watching the lightning crack across the dark sky, worrying despite herself. When she finally saw him riding in through the downpour, she hurried inside to put the kettle on for hot coffee. Garrett came through the door dripping wet, his hat streaming water. "Sorry about the mess," he said, pulling off his boots in the entryway. "I will mop it up." "You will do no such thing," Clara said firmly, bringing him a towel. "You will get out of those wet clothes before you catch your death. I will bring coffee up to your room." He looked at her for a moment, water streaming down his face, and something in his expression made her heart skip. "Thank you, Clara," he said quietly. By the time she carried the coffee tray upstairs, Garrett had changed into dry clothes, his wet hair combed back from his face. She knocked on the open door and he turned, waving her in. It was the first time she had entered his room, and she could not help noticing how neat it was, how spare. A bed, a dresser, a chair by the window. No decorations, no personal items except for a photograph on the dresser of a stern-looking couple she assumed were his parents. "I worried about you," Clara said, setting down the tray. The words came out before she could stop them. Garrett's eyes met hers. "Did you? Of course. This is dangerous land, and storms like that can kill a man." She busied herself pouring the coffee to avoid his gaze. "It would be inconvenient to have to find a new employer." "Inconvenient," Garrett repeated, and she could hear the hint of amusement in his voice. "Is that all it would be?" Clara handed him the cup, her hand trembling slightly. "I should go. Supper will be ready in an hour, Clara." His voice stopped her at the door. When she turned back, he was standing close, so close she could smell the rain on him, see the water still glistening in his hair. "I worried about you too during that storm. I thought about you here alone, and it made me ride faster than I should have in that weather." Her breath caught. "Garrett, I know this is not appropriate," he said softly. "You work for me. But I need you to know that you have become more to me than just my housekeeper, a whole lot more." Clara's heart was pounding so hard she was sure he could hear it. "I feel the same way," she whispered. "I have tried not to, but I cannot help it." Garrett reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and gently brushed a strand of hair from her face. "I will not take advantage of you. I will not ask for anything you are not willing to give, but I needed you to know how I feel." "I am willing," Clara said, surprising herself with her boldness. "I am willing to see where this leads." He smiled then, a real smile that transformed his serious face, and Clara felt something warm and bright unfold in her chest. "Then we will take it slow," Garrett said. "We will do this right. I want to court you proper, Clara Hensley, if you will let me." "I will let you," she said, smiling back at him. True to his word, Garrett courted her with old-fashioned propriety over the following months. He took her on drives across the prairie in the cool of the evening, showing her the land he loved with such passion. He brought her wildflowers, and once, a beautiful comb carved from bone that he had ordered special from a craftsman in town. They sat on the porch after supper and talked for hours, sharing their histories, their dreams, their fears. Clara learned that Garrett had inherited the ranch from his father, who had built it from nothing after serving in the Mexican War. She learned that he had lost his mother to cholera when he was 14, that he had nearly lost the ranch during the financial panic of '73, but had held on through sheer determination and hard work. She learned that he was 30 years old, that he had been engaged once but the woman had broken it off because she could not handle the isolation of ranch life, and that he had more or less given up on the idea of marriage until Clara walked into the Golden Spur Saloon. She told him about her childhood in Philadelphia, about her mother's gentle teaching and her father's louder affections. She told him about the shock of discovering the extent of her father's debts, about the auction where strangers had pawed through her mother's china and her childhood books. She told him about the fear that had driven her west and the desperate hope that she could build something new from the ashes of her old life. "You are the bravest person I have ever met," Garrett told her one evening as they sat watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and purple. "You lost everything and you did not give up. You came to a strange place and made a life for yourself through pure grit." "I had help," Clara said softly, looking at him. "You gave me a chance when no one else would." "I gave you an opportunity," Garrett corrected. "You are the one who took it and made something of it. You did not just become my housekeeper, Clara. You made this house a home again. You brought life back to a place that was just existing." As autumn turned the prairie grasses gold and the cattle were driven to market, Clara realized she had fallen completely in love with Garrett Sullivan. She loved his quiet strength, his integrity, the way he treated every living creature with respect. She loved the sound of his voice, the rare flash of his smile, the gentle touch of his work-roughened hands. She loved the life they were building together, the rhythm of their days, the comfort of their evenings. And she was fairly certain he loved her too, though neither of them had spoken the words yet. The first snow came in late November, dusting the prairie with white. Clara was in the kitchen making bread when Garrett came in, stamping the snow from his boots. She looked up to find him watching her with an intensity that made her hands still on the dough. "What is it?" she asked. Garrett crossed the kitchen in 3 long strides. "I love you," he said simply. "I have loved you since you told that bartender you were not afraid of hard work. I have loved you every day since, and I want to marry you if you will have me." Clara's eyes filled with tears. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I will have you. I love you too, Garrett. I love you so much it scares me sometimes." He pulled her into his arms, heedless of the flour that dusted her apron, and kissed her for the first time. It was gentle and sweet and full of promise, and Clara felt like she had finally come home after months of wandering. They were married in the small church in Abilene on a cold December morning, with Jack Morgan standing up as best man and several of the ranch hands in awkward attendance. Clara wore a simple blue dress that she had sewn herself, and Garrett wore his best suit. The ceremony was brief but heartfelt, and when the preacher pronounced them man and wife, Garrett kissed her with such tenderness that several of the cowboys coughed and looked away. The ranch hands had decorated the bunkhouse for a small celebration, and Clara was touched by their efforts. They had strung up paper decorations and even managed to produce a small cake that one of them had persuaded the baker in town to make. The men drank to the health of the bride and groom, and Billy Preston played a surprisingly skillful fiddle while they danced in the lantern light. That night, in the room that was now officially theirs, Garrett held Clara close and told her again that he loved her. "I know this life is hard," he said softly. "Winters are brutal, summers are baking hot, and we are miles from the nearest town. But I will do everything in my power to make you happy." "You already make me happy," Clara assured him. "This is exactly where I want to be, with you, building a life together. That is all I have ever wanted." Their first winter together was harsh, with blizzards that lasted for days and temperatures that dropped below zero. But inside the ranch house, Clara and Garrett built their own warmth. They spent long evenings by the fire, reading aloud to each other from books Clara had ordered from a catalog, or simply talking about everything and nothing. Garrett taught her to play chess, and she taught him the parlor games she had learned as a girl. When the storms were at their worst, and the ranch was completely snowed in, they made it an adventure, building pillow forts in the living room and drinking hot chocolate like children. When spring finally broke across the prairie, bringing new green grass and wildflowers, Clara discovered she was expecting a child. She told Garrett one evening after supper, watching nervously for his reaction, his face transformed with joy. "A baby," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "We are going to have a baby in October, the doctor thinks," Clara confirmed. Garrett pulled her carefully into his arms. "You have made me the happiest man alive," he said into her hair. "I did not think I could love you more than I already did, but I was wrong." The pregnancy progressed smoothly through the summer months. Clara continued her housework until Garrett finally insisted she take it easier, hiring a girl from town to come out 3 days a week to help with the heavier chores. The ranch hands treated Clara like she was made of spun glass, jumping to help her with anything she needed, and Billy Preston even carved a beautiful cradle from oak wood as a gift. On a crisp October evening, Clara went into labor. Garrett sent Jack Morgan racing into town for the doctor, while he stayed by Clara's side, holding her hand and wiping her brow with a cool cloth. The labor was long and difficult, and there were moments when Garrett's face went white with fear. But Clara was strong and determined, and just after midnight their son was born. They named him Thomas after Clara's father, and he was perfect. He had Garrett's dark hair and Clara's green eyes, and from the moment Garrett held him for the first time, Clara could see that their son had completely captured his father's heart. The years that followed were filled with the hard work and simple joys of ranch life. Thomas grew into a sturdy boy who followed his father everywhere, learning about horses and cattle almost before he could walk. When he was 3, Clara gave birth to twin girls, Sarah and Emma, who inherited their father's quiet strength and their mother's determination. 3 years after that came another boy, Daniel, who was as wild and reckless as his older brother was steady. The ranch prospered under Garrett's careful management. He expanded the herd, bought more land, and built a reputation for producing the best cattle in Kansas. Clara managed the household with skill and grace, raising their children, keeping the books for the ranch, and maintaining the home that had become the heart of their family. She never regretted leaving Philadelphia behind, never mourned the life of ease she might have had. This was her life, these were her people, and she loved every hard-won moment of it. When Thomas was 10, he asked his mother how she and his father had met. Clara smiled and told him the story of walking into the Golden Spur Saloon looking for work, of his father standing up and offering her a place at the ranch. Was it love at first sight? Thomas asked with a boy's curiosity. Clara considered the question. Not at first sight, she said honestly. But it was something at first sight, recognition maybe, like we both knew that this meeting mattered, that it was going to change everything. And you are glad it did, Thomas pressed. More glad than I can ever explain, Clara told him, glancing across the porch to where Garrett sat whittling a toy horse for Daniel. Your father gave me a chance when I needed it most. He saw something in me that I was not sure I saw in myself. And in return, I got to build a life with the best man I have ever known. Garrett looked up and caught her eye, and the smile he gave her was full of the same love that had grown between them over the years, deepened by shared struggles and multiplied by the family they had created together. As the years continued to pass, the Sullivan Ranch became known throughout Kansas not just for its cattle, but for the family that ran it. People spoke of Garrett Sullivan's fairness and integrity, of Clara Sullivan's hospitality and strength. The ranch hands who worked for them stayed for years, knowing they had a good employer who treated them right. The Sullivan children grew up strong and capable, learning the value of hard work and the importance of treating others with respect. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Garrett took Clara on a trip back to Abilene. They walked past the Golden Spur Saloon, which was now under new management but still standing. You ever wonder what would have happened if I had not been there that day? Garrett asked, his arm around her waist. Sometimes, Clara admitted, but I try not to dwell on it. The fact is, you were there, you stood up when no one else did, you gave me a chance and you changed my life completely. You changed mine too, Garrett said softly. I was just existing before you came, going through the motions, building the ranch but not really living. You brought color and warmth and love into my life. You gave me a family, a real home, a reason to build something that will last beyond my lifetime. They stood together on the dusty street, older now but no less in love than they had been as newlyweds. Around them, the town bustled with activity, but they were lost in their own memories of that pivotal day when a desperate young woman and a lonely rancher had found exactly what they needed in each other. I would do it all again, Clara said. Every hard moment, every struggle, every fear. I would walk through those doors again 1,000 times knowing it led me to you. Garrett pulled her close and kissed her there in the middle of the street, and Clara felt the same flutter in her heart that she had felt the first time he had kissed her 20 years ago. By the time Thomas was 25, he had taken over much of the day-to-day running of the ranch, allowing Garrett and Clara more time to simply enjoy the life they had built. The twins had grown into beautiful, capable young women who helped their mother manage the household and had both attracted considerable attention from young men in the area. Daniel, at 19, was every bit as wild as he had been as a boy, but he had his father's good heart and his mother's intelligence, and everyone knew he would settle down eventually. Clara and Garrett spent more evenings on the porch now, watching the sun set over land that had become as familiar as their own hands. They held hands like young lovers, comfortable in the silence that came from decades of knowing each other completely. Sometimes they talked about the early days, laughing at how naive they had been in some ways, marveling at how quickly the years had passed. Do you remember what you said to me that first night? Clara asked one evening as they rocked gently in the chairs Garrett had built for their 10th anniversary. When you came in from the storm. I said a lot of things that night, Garrett replied, his thumb tracing circles on the back of her hand. You said I had become more to you than just your housekeeper, Clara reminded him. A whole lot more. That was when I knew for certain that you felt the same way I did. I was terrified saying those words, Garrett admitted. Terrified you would tell me I was being inappropriate, that you would want to leave, but I had to tell you I could not keep it inside anymore. I am glad you did not, Clara said softly. I am glad you were brave enough to speak up. Otherwise, we might have danced around our feelings for months or even years, too afraid to risk what we had. Best risk I ever took, Garrett said. Asking you to marry me, building a life with you, having our children, every bit of it was worth whatever fear I felt. As they sat together in the gathering dusk, their children's voices drifting from inside the house where the family was gathering for supper, Clara reflected on the strange and wonderful path her life had taken. If someone had told that desperate 23-year-old woman who walked into the Golden Spur Saloon that she would end up here, surrounded by love and family on a thriving ranch in the heart of Kansas, she would not have believed it possible. But here she was, 44 years old now, with silver threading through her dark hair and laugh lines around her eyes, living a life richer than anything she could have imagined in her Philadelphia childhood. She had learned that home was not a place, but the people you built it with. She had learned that love was not just a feeling but a choice you made every day to put another person's happiness alongside your own. She had learned that strength came not from never falling, but from getting back up every time you did. Most of all, she had learned that sometimes the worst moments of your life were actually the doorway to the best ones. Losing everything had forced her west, but finding Garrett had given her everything that truly mattered. The twins called them in to supper, and Garrett helped Clara to her feet with the same gentle care he had always shown her. Inside, the house was warm and bright with lamplight. The long table was crowded with their children and Jack Morgan, who had become like family over the years, and several of the longtime ranch hands who often joined them for the evening meal. As Clara looked around the table at these faces she loved so much, she caught Garrett's eye and saw her own contentment reflected there. They had built something solid and good, something that would outlast them and continue in their children and grandchildren. The ranch would endure, not just as a business but as a home, a place where people were treated with dignity and hard work was rewarded, where family came first and love was the foundation of everything. After supper, when the dishes were washed and the younger children were in bed, Clara and Garrett returned to the porch. The night was clear and cool, with stars scattered across the sky like diamonds on black velvet. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled, and closer by, the cattle settled for the night with low, contented sounds. "I have been thinking," Garrett said after a while. "In a few years, when Thomas is fully ready to take over, maybe we could take that trip you always talked about. Go back east, see some of the places you remember, visit Philadelphia, maybe." Clara considered this, then shook her head. "I appreciate the thought, but I do not need to go back. Everything I want is right here. Besides, Philadelphia would not be the same. The people I knew are gone or scattered. The house I grew up in belongs to someone else. This is my home now, and I would not trade it for anything. Not even for an easier life," Garrett teased gently. "No more harsh winters or prairie storms, no more worrying about drought or cattle prices. Not even for that," Clara said firmly. "This life has shaped me into who I am. You have shaped me, our children, this land, even the hardships. They have all made me stronger and happier than I ever was in my comfortable Philadelphia existence. I would not change a single thing." Garrett lifted her hand and kissed it softly. "You are an extraordinary woman, Clara Sullivan. I knew it the moment I saw you standing in that saloon, chin up and eyes blazing, refusing to be cowed by those men, but you have exceeded even my highest expectations." "We have been good for each other," Clara said simply. "That is what matters. We have built something real and lasting. We have raised good children who know how to work hard and love well. We have been partners in every sense of the word. That is more than most people ever get." They sat in comfortable silence for a while longer, wrapped in blankets against the evening chill, hands clasped together. The house behind them was quiet now, all their children settled for the night. The ranch spread out around them, peaceful under the star-filled sky. Clara thought about that young woman who had walked into the Golden Spur Saloon 22 years ago, frightened and desperate but determined not to show it. She wanted to tell that girl that everything would be all right, that the tall cowboy standing up to offer her work would become the love of her life, that the hard years ahead would be filled with more joy than sorrow, more laughter than tears. But perhaps it was better that she had not known. Perhaps the journey was sweeter for having been taken one uncertain step at a time, for having had to find her strength in the moment rather than relying on the assurance of a happy ending. She had earned this life through courage and hard work and the willingness to take a chance on a stranger's offer. "What are you thinking about?" Garrett asked softly. "About how grateful I am," Clara replied. "For you, for our children, for this life we have built together. I walked into that saloon with nothing but desperation and a willingness to work. I walked out with my future, though I did not know it then. I walked in there alone," Garrett said, "and I walked out with my reason for living. Fair trade, I would say." Clara laughed softly and leaned her head on his shoulder. "More than fair, the best trade either of us ever made." They stayed on the porch until the night grew too cold to remain outside. Then they went into their home, the home they had made together, and climbed the stairs to the room they shared. Outside, the wind whispered across the prairie, carrying the scent of grass and cattle and the open sky. The Double G Ranch settled into nighttime quiet, secure and prosperous, a testament to what two people could build when they combined love with hard work and unwavering commitment. Years later, when Clara and Garrett were old and their children had children of their own, people would still tell the story of how they met. How a desperate young woman from Philadelphia had walked into the Golden Spur Saloon looking for work, and how a lonely rancher had stood up and offered her a place at his ranch. It became a family legend, polished smooth with repeated telling, a reminder that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is ask for help, and sometimes the kindest thing you can do is offer it to a stranger who needs it. But for Clara and Garrett, it was not a legend but a living memory, as real and present as the love that still existed between them after all those years. They had taken a chance on each other when neither had anything to offer but themselves, and they had built an empire of love and family that would endure for generations. On a warm spring day when Clara was 70 and Garrett was 76, they stood together at the edge of their land, watching their grandchildren play in the distance. Thomas ran the ranch now, with Daniel as his foreman and the twins' husbands working as partners in the business. The Double G had expanded over the years, becoming one of the most successful ranches in Kansas. "We did all right, did we not?" Garrett said, his arm around Clara's still slender waist. "Better than all right," Clara corrected, smiling up at him. "We did wonderfully." "I love you, Clara Sullivan," Garrett said, the words as heartfelt as they had been the first time he spoke them. "I have loved you every day for 48 years, and I will love you for however many days we have left." "And I love you," Clara replied, rising on her toes to kiss him. "Thank you for standing up that day. Thank you for giving me a chance. Thank you for loving me." "Thank you for walking through those doors," Garrett said softly. "Thank you for being brave enough to take what I offered. Thank you for making my house into a home and my life into something worth living." They stood together as the sun climbed higher in the sky, two people who had found each other against all odds and had never let go. Around them, the ranch hummed with life and activity, a living legacy of their love and hard work. In the distance, their grandchildren's laughter rang out like bells, the sound of joy and innocence and the promise of the future. Clara thought about that terrified girl walking into the saloon, and she wished she could tell her that sometimes life works out better than you could ever plan. Sometimes losing everything means you have room to gain everything that truly matters. Sometimes a stranger's kindness changes the entire course of your life. But mostly, she wished she could tell that girl to hold on, to be brave, to walk through those doors despite the fear. Because on the other side of that threshold was not just a job or a roof over her head, but a love that would define her life, a family that would give it meaning, and a home that would always be her refuge in the storm. As they turned to walk back toward the house for lunch with their family, Clara squeezed Garrett's hand and he squeezed back, a silent conversation that needed no words. They had said everything important long ago, had built their love on a foundation of honesty and respect that had only grown stronger with time. Now, in the autumn of their lives, they could simply be together, content in the knowledge that they had done what they set out to do. They had built a good life, raised good children, and loved each other well. The house rose before them, solid and welcoming, smoke curling from the chimney where dinner was being prepared. Through the windows, they could see their family moving about, setting the table, laughing together, living the life that Clara and Garrett had made possible through their courage and commitment all those years ago. And as they climbed the porch steps together, hand in hand just as they had been for nearly 5 decades, Clara knew with absolute certainty that walking into the Golden Spur Saloon that dusty afternoon in 1878 had been the best decision of her life. Because it had led her here, to this moment, to this man, to this beautiful, hard-won life that she would not trade for anything in the world.